So that's the thing. They now have the experience of the fall is an internal one. They're aware of the fact that they're naked for the first time, and they're aware of the fact that they're naked because of how they experience their opposite. And if I can look at her that way, she must be able to look at me that way, and God must also look at us that way. And I don't like that one little bit, because I am now looking at that person no longer as a person I love, but as somebody who is an object in some ways. So you're objectifying. They're both doing it. And they're both aware of it, so they want to be covered from that and removed from the threat of being an object rather than a person, and how they do that is through covering. So their innocence is gone. They feel guilty. They feel ashamed.
So by that then, now they think of God as sinful like them?
Well, they now can't comprehend how God thinks. They've lost that sense, and they're afraid of God. They've totally lost it. Yes, they've lost the sense of what God's like. That's how far the fall happens, quickly. There's a sort of spiritual death. They will physically die one day, but they've spiritually died right now. To be spiritually dead is to no longer acknowledge God as a loving Heavenly Father, a loving Creator, which they always had. They communed with Him. He walked in the garden with them. Now they see Him as a mortal threat. And they don't even want Him to look on them. So they no longer know God. God hasn't changed. But they have. Yes?
It's just interesting because it says right after she ate it, they suddenly felt shame, and then they felt fear.
Yep.
Because they were afraid. So just that distinction of saying once we walk and willingly turn to sin, it causes that separation from God and these other traits from Satan of fear and shame and all of that.
Yeah. So the promise is that they will become more godlike and they will rise up, and in fact, they don't become like animals, because animals are not ashamed. They don't cover themselves with skins. Well, they got skins. They're not. But there's no such. Animals don't hide because they're ashamed. They hide because they're afraid of other animals. But that's not why they're hiding. They're hiding because they're ashamed. That's a moral response. Shame is a moral response. They're ashamed of their thoughts, which they know are corrupt. But they're afraid of God because they no longer recognize that He thinks about things differently than they do. They see Him as an amplified version of themselves. Yes?
So is that why whenever we do something wrong, our conscience and morals automatically
Yes.
tell us?
Yes. Unless your conscience is seared.
What do you mean?
If you repeat consistently knowing that it's a sin, eventually you lose the knowledge of the fact that it's a sin. You'll deny that it is one. So the worst consequence of sin is more sin. That's the worst one. You keep on sinning. The second worst is that you lose the knowledge of the fact that your sin is sin. And we all do it. That's the bad bit. So it's just, whenever these sorts of questions arise, everybody, their eyes look down, they feel ashamed because they're thinking about something they think. But everyone does it. It's a shameful condition. It's a terrible consequence of sin, is that you get this terrible guilt.
Yeah,
and you're condemning yourself for it. And this is why you preach the gospel. Jesus came to save sinners. And if you have acknowledged him, and we're both simultaneously just and sinner, says Luther, and I think this is correct. We're a sinner, and yet we're justified in God's sight when we have faith in Christ. We remain a sinner, but it's a forgiven sinner. And that's the important bit. But the sin, you're still a sinner. You're just a forgiven sinner. And if that weren't true, then you would no longer sin. And I think that people who are Christians still sin. And I defy anyone to tell me that they don't. And if they say that, I'll ask their family.
No, I think it's the part that you said that if you do it so much that you lose your sense of
conscience. Yes, sear your conscience. Yeah.
That's something I never. Okay, that's what.
You can So the way you deal with your guilt is by repeating the offense so that it's sort of like watering it down so the point doesn't seem so bad. You can see that in various forms. Think of the addictions, gambling, alcohol, drug, whatever. So the initial high is such and whatever, okay. But then you have to do more of whatever to you're trying to chase that high, and eventually you're not even getting any satisfaction from the original sin, but you can't stop doing it, and in fact you no longer want to stop doing it. It's a terrible state. I think you can be pulled out of it by God's grace, but that's what I'm talking about, yeah. And so that's an empirical thing I observed before I was a Christian about people who were in addictions, and then I realized that I was an addict as well, just not of that sort, but there were certain habits of mine, whatever, but I didn't have an alcohol problem or a gambling problem, but that sinful inclination to keep on doing things and then deny that it was actually, oh, I didn't mean to do that, it was, I did it for this, well, now I've lied as well, right? And then I found that everybody was like that. Yes?
This is off topic a little bit, but can a conscience be restored after it being seared?
Yes, by the grace of God. But then it clearly is a grace of God thing. It does happen. Because the people who are, so for instance, the people who persecute Christians, they think they're doing a good thing. Paul is an example of this. He was the chief of the persecutors, and he thought he was doing a great thing. His conscience was seared, and God then blinded him and reached out to him and spoke to him, forgave him, and then he called himself the chief of sinners. So yes, I do think so. But sin has that sort of, it grips you, and it grips you ever tighter, and you become more and more miserable. But just because you're more miserable doesn't mean that you're actually going to reach out to God. I see just as many examples, if not more, of the exact opposite. That's why I say it's all God's grace. And I do know people who've been in terrible state who have come to faith by the grace of God and been released from those habits and addictions. But it's all a mystery on that front. So he speaks to her. She takes the scent. She takes a bite of that of the forbidden fruit. And what does it say here? 780. So saying, her rash hand in evil hour forth reaching to the fruit, she plucked, she eat. Earth felt the wound. Remember, Adam's been created from the dust. It's from the earth, and she's been from his side, so the earth felt the wound. It's partaken of the fall right there. Earth felt the wound, and nature from her seat, sighing through all her works, gave signs of woe that all was lost. Back to the thicket slunk the guilty serpent, and well might, for Eve intent now wholly on her taste, naught else regarded, such delight till then as seemed in fruit she never tasted. Whether true or fancied so, though through expectation high of knowledge, nor was Godhead from her thought. Greedily she engorged without restraint. This description, she's now doing it out of greed. It's what the product of her sin. Her pride, first of all, and now her greed and her idolatry. There are all manner of sins that are going to pop out here. And then she begins and speaks to the tree, O sovereign, precious, virtuous, precious of all trees in paradise. That's how she begins the speech. She concludes it with 834. She bows down to the tree and does it reverence. As to the power that dwelt within. So now she's worshiping the power of nature in the tree. So she's gone from worshiping the God who created all things, including her, and now she worships the tree. Witchcraft, sorcery, idolatry,
Hermeticism, too.
all those things, same thing, to this day. Yes?
So really there was the shift of, in the hierarchy.
In a sense.
The tree becoming God.
Well, she doesn't cease to become human. She's just a fallen human. But now, rather than worshiping God, she worships herself. Herself, the animals and vegetables.
Yeah.
She goes vegan, no. No, it doesn't go there. But worships anything besides God. And chiefly she worships herself. Martin Luther, in his commentary on Romans, in Book 3, talks about sin being curved in upon ourselves. Describes sin as being curved in upon ourselves, looking upon ourselves rather than looking to God. Mankind's created erect on 2 feet, stands up, is meant to look above, not to crawl on all fours, to stand up and tower above the other creatures. But because of sin, he doesn't go down on all fours. He turns his gaze internally. He becomes obsessed with his own thoughts and desires. But now, Adam, let's set the stage to Adam. Adam, the while waiting her desirous her return, had wove of choicest flowers a garland to adorn her tresses, and rural labor's crown, as reapers oft are wont their harvest queen. Great joy he promised to his thoughts, and new solace in her return, so long delayed. Yet oft his heart, divine of something ill, misgave him, he the faltering measure felt, and forth to meet her went, the way she took that morn when first they parted. By the tree of knowledge he must pass, there he her met, scarce from the tree returning. In her hand a bough of fairest fruit that downy smiled, new gathered and ambrosial smell diffused. By the way, the word ambrosial means, ambrosia is the food of the gods. There's a divine smell. To him she hastened, in her face excuse came prologue and apology to prompt, which with bland words at will she thus addressed. By the way, just before this, when she was debating, she had the tree, she's sitting there, she said, you know what, I wonder what I should do here with this thing. How will I appear to Adam? Should I make him known, tell him what I did? Or rather not, and keep the knowledge to myself, and therefore be like a god, and he will worship me? Should I do that? Maybe I should do that, and my superiority in rank will make him love me even more. Maybe I should do that. And she says, add what wants in female sex, the more to draw his love, and render me more equal. They're already equal. And you're going to make her more equal. How can you be more equal when you're already equal? Anyway. And perhaps a thing not undesirable, sometimes superior. For inferior who is free. Well, who does that sound like? That sounds like Satan. Inferior who is free. This may be well. And then she comes to the thought, but what if God have seen and death ensue? Then I shall be no more, and worse still, and Eve, Adam wedded to another Eve, shall live with her enjoying. I extinct. A death to think. Confirmed then I resolve, Adam shall share with me in bliss or woe. So dear I love him, and with him all deaths I could endure, without him live no life. So she resolves to kill him. Because she loves him. Because she's been given the death sentence. And so she's going to die, potentially, and she wants to avoid that, so she's going to give Adam the fruit as well, so that he can't live on without her. So she's assented to his murder by giving him the fruit that will bring about his death. Yes?
So then not only have they lost the ability to love God, but they can't love each other.
Of course not. What's the greatest command? To love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor. Well, Eve demonstrates that she can do neither. So then he meets her, and she says, have you wondered at my stay? Thee I missed, and thought it long, deprived thy presence, agony of love till now not felt, nor shall be twice, for never more mean I to try, what rash untried I sought, the pain of absence from thy sight. But strange hath been the cause, and wonderful to hear, this tree is not, as we are told, a tree of danger, tasted, nor to evil unknown opening the way, but of divine effect to open eyes, and make them gods who taste. And hath been tasted such, the serpent wise, or not restrained as we, or not obeying, hath eaten of the fruit, and is become, not dead, as we are threatened, but thenceforth endued with human voice and human sense, reasoning to admiration, and with me persuasively hath so availed that I have also tasted, and have also found the effects to correspond. Opener mine eyes, dim airs, dilated spirits, ampler heart, and growing up to Godhead, which for thee chiefly I sought. Liar. I did it for you, Adam. And now, without thee, I can despise. For bliss, as thou hast part, to me is bliss. Tedious, unshared with thee, and odious soon. Thou therefore also taste, that equal lot may join us, equal joy as equal love. Note that she's preaching equality here. Instead of love, we'll get equality. Let us have the same fate. I did it out of love, let's be equal. Lest thou not tasting different degree disjoin us, and I then too late renounce deity for thee when fate will not permit. So you better hurry up and eat this. So threaten him at the end, or I'm going to maybe I'll decide not to let you have deity. And it might be too late for you, so you better hurry up. Thus Eve with countenance blithe her story told, but in her cheek distemper flushing glowed. On the other side, Adam, soon as he heard the fatal trespass done by Eve, amazed. Again, that word. Astonied stood and blank while horror chill ran through his veins, and all his joints relaxed. From his slack hand the garland wreathed for Eve down dropped, and all the faded roses shed. Speechless he stood and pale, till thus at length first to himself he inward silence broke. But note again, I mentioned the hands, they departed, they had held hands. She comes back, in her hands the forbidden fruit. He has the garland, and it drops from his hands, and the flowers on it have now withered and fallen to the ground. This is a pathetic fallacy. That's the technical term for this. So that there's a natural sign of a moral cause.
What line is that, sorry?
The faded roses?
Yeah.
893.
Thank you.
Welcome. And then Adam's great speech. O fairest of creation, last and best of all God's works, creature in whom excelled whatever can to sight or thought be formed. By the way, he's not flattering her. This is interesting. This is Adam, the unfallen Adam, speaking of Eve. Last and best of all God's works, creature in whom excelled whatever can to sight or thought be formed. Holy, divine, good, amiable, or sweet. How art thou lost? How on a sudden lost? Defaced, deflowered, and now to death devote. Great use of alliteration. Rather how hast thou yielded to transgress the strict forbiddance? How to violate the sacred fruit forbidden? Some cursed fraud of enemy hath beguiled thee, yet unknown, and me with thee hath ruined. For with thee certain my resolution is to die. How can I live without thee? How forego thy sweet converse and love so dearly joined? To live again in these wild woods forlorn. Should God create another Eve, and I another rib afford? Yet loss of thee would never from my heart. No, no, I feel the link of nature draw me, flesh of flesh, bone of my bone thou art, and from thy state mine never shall be parted, bliss or woe. So, is Adam deceived by what Eve has said? Is he following her arguments? No, he's not. He's dismissing them. He's not even entertaining them. He doesn't think that there's anything good in it for them. He's just committed to share what has happened to her, which is a beautiful sentiment. Except, you want to comment before I... Go ahead.
I'm wondering if, in your opinion, this is actually done out of love on Adam's part.
Yes. Towards Eve. Yes, I do. He's yet unfallen, right? I don't think there's any fraud or deceit in it. I think his response is sincere. That doesn't mean that it's correct, but I don't think it's a sinful response either. He does it out of love. On the other hand, who does he reject in the process? God. God who created him out of love, and God who is not only his loving creator, but God who has given him Eve. So he has a terrible choice here. She was unjust in her choice. He's going to be unjust in his choice. The possibility that both of them conceive is that God could create another Eve. Both of them mention that explicitly. Eve is so set against that she's willing to kill him to prevent it from happening because she loves him so much. On his part, he repeats what she says, but not with the same rationale. I cannot bear to be parted from you because you are bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. What could he do in this situation? Different. It's pure speculation because he doesn't do differently. And then once again, if you go to the Genesis 3 text, Eve and Adam are together when the temptation takes place, not separate. So Milton is amplifying the text hugely here by making it dramatic as well. But you want to comment or answer the question I asked? Go ahead.
I just have a question.
Yes.
What do you think that Milton's daughter thought when he was writing this? Like,
I don't know.
like, is there like any record?
She must have some. No, I don't think. Not that I know of. But I mean, she must have known her father's thoughts. I mean, she grew up in the same house, and she must have had some. I mean, she's not just sitting there with. It's not like it's a stranger. It's her father. She must have some knowledge of his way of thinking.
Like, how would they like go from like time to write and be like, oh yeah, it's dinner time, and then just like go and like do something normal after you literally write this?
Yeah. Well, must have been exciting times. We're almost there. What could he have done differently? Well, I mean, because now at this point, the original sin is not yet. So the earth felt the pang because Eve fell, but Adam has not yet fallen. The commandment was given to Adam. Remember? Genesis 2:15. It was Adam that was given the commandment, not Eve. So he has the choice here to be obedient. He has that choice. His will is free. There's no reason why he cannot. But Eve's been corrupted. And he sees that, and that she has sinned against God, and he knows that that's the case. He's not deceived. It says that in the New Testament as well. Adam was not deceived. We would not have known that, by the way, without the commentary from the New Testament. Because Eve gives it to Adam there in the Genesis text, but maybe he believed what the serpent said as well, but it says no. So that's how Milton has dealt with it, by separating them all together. As to say, if he's there and he's not convinced, even in the Genesis text, why doesn't he stop her? That's, again, problems. What could he have done? He could have offered himself as the sacrifice for her. Or he not yet, there has to be a penalty for sin. Adam himself could have offered himself up for Eve. But then there's no Adam. That's not really a solution. He could have let Eve die. I've heard that over the years. Say, oh, there you go. This woman that you gave me, look what she did. It's terrible. Remember that woman? Yeah. He could have prayed to God and asked for forgiveness for her, and asked and counseled with God. He doesn't do that. Doesn't approach God, none of that. He's saying, and God, of course, who we already know the mind of God about what's happening. God's looking on the whole spectacle, and Adam does not bring God into the situation at all. But one day there would be an Adam that would die for Eve, and it would be Christ, of course. The second Adam. Yeah.
I know you mentioned in previous lectures about the word amazed being basically you're in a maze.
In a maze, yeah, and so you're caught up and confused.
Why is this word amazed used if Adam is not deceived?
Yeah, so it's not. It's a perplexity, confusion, but not a rational loss. But how on earth did this happen? Because Eve had the capacity to stand. I warned her. She was it's not that Eve lacked in intelligence per se. It's that she was, how on earth could this ever have happened? It's amazed in that sense. Like just dumbstruck. And it was a few hours. And then done. And he agrees to die, and then he will eat from this. I think I'm going to run out of time. So I'm going to have to pick it up next class, and I will get through Book 12 next class. And then we'll move on to, I believe it's, what is it, Alexander Pope, Rape of the Lock? And it's in the other book. So bring the other book next time. You're going to have to get 2 books. Okay, so the volume 2 next class, and we will